to practice? No. Do we get to practice with the weapons? No. You know, it's going to be first shot, first scene, because we can't afford to, pay for these $3,000 torsos again and these $300 to $500 skull heads. So that was a little frustrating. And then you had the guys who represented the gladiators that, in their own right, they want to make it in Hollywood, and they have all this stuntmen and small acting background, so they want to look good and they want to win. But as the show progressed and they started filming more and more, they started realizing that their skill sets weren't the same on the Apache compared to the Apaches, and they never told us who was going to win. They never told us who was going to lose. We never saw the scenery like how you guys see it on the final show. We saw it the day before, and that was it. If we went to the premiere, and then I don't think you made it to the premiere, right? The day before in Vegas. I think we saw it together when it first aired in your town, right? The show
well,
when it first came out.
You went to the premiere,
okay,
and I was busy on something and I couldn't make it. And then later on, we saw it in Bill City.
That's what it was. Yeah, because he wanted to know. He's like, I'm gonna have my friends over. Did we win? And I'm like, yes, we won. He's like, okay, cool. Then we'll invite the friends and we'll watch it together. And it was pretty funny too, because when everybody kind of see the show, a lot of the characters in the show we never even met before, because they had that reenactment, and we never met those guys before either. So they kind of, when I talked to them, when they did the reenactment before the airing of it, they had the Apache and the Gladiator do a scenario where the Apache wins, and then they did the scenario where the Gladiator wins. So that way the characters doing that scene couldn't go out in the public and tell them, hey, the Apaches are going to win or the Gladiators are going to win, which I thought was pretty smart.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Freaking 10 years later, I finally know the story, man.
Yeah, they used to, at the end of the show, they do that little computer simulated thing,
yeah.
brought to you by Isleta and Studios. Was that legit, or did they just pick who was going to win?
No, so they actually had a software, and I almost think it was the Canadian company that came out with it, but that was an actual software that they said, hey, we want to compare the integrity of a stone versus a steel. We want to compare and it wasn't just like in one scenario. They had to outplay, they had to do tests on 1,000 scenarios. Okay, if we throw a tomahawk 1,000 times, if we throw a knife 1,000 times, if we throw a trident 1,000 times, how well is the equipment going to stand up, number one? And then the skill set, is it a small arena? How effective are those weapons in a gladiator arena, as opposed to would they be really effective if there's trees in the way and all that stuff like that? So the X factor kind of was a big part of it. And then people don't realize that, because after the show people are saying, well, this could have happened. I'm like, yeah, it could have happened. In fact, it did in the scenario, because they played out 1,000 battles, and of 1,000 battles, it was something like 667 battles the Apaches showed winning based on this weapon and this skill set and this X factor. So that's how they came out. They said if they're a big battle and there's all these 1,000 mini battles going on in a war, Apaches are still going to come out killing all the gladiators. However, it doesn't mean that the Apaches aren't going to die. There's still going to be a bunch of Apaches dead, but we win in the whole battle. So, but they didn't really explain that well, and so I think the audience kind of lost that point. They just thought it's one fight, one battle, boom, like it's just that battle. But that was a great question.
It's funny when they say that, well, it could have happened this way, and I just say, well, too bad it didn't. Apaches won, haha. And you even had Chuck Liddell, the Iceman, and we still kicked your ass, haha.
And Chuck Liddell wasn't the first. He wasn't in the script at all. He was an after fact, because one of the gladiators was his sparring partner, and he talked Chuck Liddell into coming. So he was just kind of an added on that everybody was like, oh, they're like, hey, Chuck's gonna come, and we're all like, really? And I'm like, and I'm a UFC fan, so I went out and bought one of the UFC books that had a picture of him. I say, hey, Chuck, sign it. He's like, yeah, sure. He was actually a cool dude. I thought he was a little bit more introverted and a little bit more shy. But he was, he admits it. He was impressed with the Apache skill, and he was impressed with the tomahawk throwing. He was impressed with the knife throwing. He was really impressed with the speed, because there's a part where we're cutting. He has that big sword hand thing, and he's just slicing through the slab of beef. He's like, whoa. And then he's like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. And then I'm on there, and I'm like, and then he's just like, okay. Because I told him, I said, yeah, I said, you got one guy. I said, I got this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. And, then he's like, his eyeballs got kind of raised.
There was a lot of rivalry going on. There was one guy in the Gladiators side that we did not like each other. We were talking trash and smack it all the time, you know. There's a couple times he kind of pissed me off. I was just like, well, let's just go outside in the back, you know. We just, you know, it was just going on. And I remember they were interviewing Chuck Liddell. Chuck was cool, you know, but he's pretty scary. When he's punching that bag, you see him hitting a bag, you know why he's knocking everybody out, you know what I mean? Sick power. But they were talking to him and there was all this commotion going on and, you know, the competition's going on and he goes, yeah, well, you know, if you give me an Apache and it's man to man, fist to fist, man, I know I'm gonna beat him, you know? And I go, oh yeah, Chuck, well, punch this. You know? Real knives, you know? Punch this, dude, hard as you want. You're gonna lose. But there was a lot of stuff going on, and I remember when we were, it was kind of funny because we didn't know each other's skill set. So they tell us, well, dude, we're gonna do the tomahawk, we're gonna do that. And we're going like, well, what are you gonna do? What do you wanna do? You do the tomahawks. No, you do the tomahawks. You do the knife. No, you do the knife. Why don't you just do everything and I'll stand here and look like an Apache. But everybody, it's funny because my ways of approaching the fighting arts and all of that, it's really simple. I break it down because the Screama's got like, some have five strikes, some have 9, and I think the main one has 12, you know, because you're going through all the stuff. And mine's is really simple with knife throwing and tomahawk throwing. It's just more of a natural process because you say the target's right here. And what I do is I take steps, and when I get around to 7, I just spin, and if it's a tomahawk or knife, I throw it, so that it's just a natural process. So my magic number is 9. So if there was a target, I'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I'm just like, bam. And if it hits, I can pretty much tell you that spot that I mark out, I'm always gonna hit. That's just the way I do it. So when we were getting ready, the weeks leading up to the Deadliest Warrior, they let us know what weapons they might want us to use. So I was, you know, using my bow at home and practicing knives, and then I didn't have a tomahawk. I just had a camping hatchet. So everybody thinks that I was born with a tomahawk and a bow, you know, and I'm just killer Apache expert with this stuff. And the truth of the matter is, out of a time of getting ready for the whole shoot, which was about a month, I only practiced 3 hours in the tomahawk. It was just something that was there for me, you know. And out of 30 throws at about 32 feet, I never missed one, because that was my 9th step, and that's how that worked. And with the bow, it was a crappy bow, so we had to make some changes and stuff and redo some of the arrows, and that ended up working out pretty good, you know. They made me look good. So that's the magic of TV. And I just remember watching Snake, and the thing that really impressed me about Snake is most of the guys, when they throw a weapon, you know, they spin it. But Snake has this throw where it's just straight. And I remember that when he was just launching those knives and they were just sticking, man, you could just see the panel and the gladiators just going down. And when we first got there, everything was chaotic. I mean, even I'm watching the time too, okay? And everything was chaotic, and everybody was running everywhere, and there was no script, like he said. And I'm a full-blood Apache, so whether it was the Deadliest Warriors or me going out on a mission or whatever, the first thing I do is, I'll light up a prayer cigarette and I'll pray, you know, help me, you know. So I told him and the producers, I'm gonna step out and I'm gonna do a prayer cigarette, you know, because that's the only thing I knew what to do, you know. The tension was on. I didn't know who was gonna win. I didn't know how the performances were gonna work. So we were going outside to go smoke the cigarette, and somebody comes running up, and it's like the assistant director, and she's like, oh my God, say a prayer for us too. Things are crazy, you know, it's so chaotic, and I'm freaking out. I said, don't worry about it. So we went out, we did the prayer cigarette, we came back in, and I tell you what, everything went wrong for the gladiators, man. Everything. Their weapons were breaking. The guy he had that slingshot, he couldn't even hit that thing right there. I mean, everything went wrong. Their weapons were breaking. I was just kind of snickering, haha. So that was pretty cool, and everything that we did worked out real well. None of our weapons broke, except unless he wanted to break them. And the only thing that I won't do that Snake does is there's no damn way you're gonna pay me enough money to put a scorpion, man. No. And the other thing that I would like to clarify, 'cause Snake mentioned it yesterday, maybe some Apache tribes use coyote stuff or jawbones, or maybe other tribes do, but the Jicarillas and the Navajos, anything that's of coyote, owl, or the bear, that's taboo. So maybe some will and some won't, but I wanted to clarify that even though there's like 7 or 8 tribes of Apache, we all have different beliefs. Take over.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I get that asked a lot. I'm like, well, my tribe doesn't do it. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't. But so-and-so who's from another tribe, this is their background, this is their story. And it's no different from here. I mean, you talk to 1,000 white people and they have different religions, right? 1,000 white people and they have different survival ideas, and they've got different martial art backgrounds. It's no different. People don't realize how diverse the Apache culture is. I've historically documented over 70 Apache tribes and bands. That's a lot, and there was up to about 150 or more back then in the old days as well. One of the actual producers, Gary, what was his last?
Tarpinian?
Yeah, so Gary calls me. This is maybe can't tell the time, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and we're just chatting, and he, talking about like stuff you hear later on, like after the fact. He says, "Oh yeah," he's like, "after the Deadliest Warrior filmed, do you know so-and-so?" And I can't think of his name right now, but he's a well-known producer. He's done, I think he's the guy who produced like Conan the Barbarian and probably about 1,000 other big-time A-list movies. And he's like, and he's really good friends with Gary. And Gary says, yeah, he calls me after the Deadliest Warrior and he says, "Who the heck is that motherfucker Snake Blocker?" And he's like, "Oh, well, he's like, "Where the heck did you find him?" He's like, "That guy's badass." He's like, "Did you guys do any tricks in that?" He's like, no. He's like, he just kind of came out and started throwing everything and breaking everything. So I thought that was kind of funny. So I appreciate you telling me that. But going back to Alan, when the knife throwing was happening, I was debating whether to do the spin or whether to do the straight. But because the gladiators too were talking about, they're trying to debunk everything we do. And they actually did what I thought they were going to do, because they're like, well, if you got a spinning knife coming at you and you move just 1 inch out of the way, then it's the butt of the knife that hits you, not the knife, and it's not going to do any damage. And then they showed the slow-mo, and you see the knife just going straight. So whether they moved back or forth or right or left, it still would have hit them on the target. And then same thing with Alan when he's doing the tomahawk. Chuck Liddell's watching it, and he's like, man, he's like, my kid, he has a son, he has, I think, a couple of kids. I know one's in Colorado, out where I live, but he's like, my son asked me if I can learn how to do tomahawk throwing like the Apaches. So he said, Chuck Liddell actually told us that his son was a big fan of the Apaches and actually wanted the Apaches to win, So afterwards he got with Alan, and Alan off screen came down in here, and he was teaching Chuck Liddell how to spin it, and he got Chuck Liddell to do it within just a few minutes, and Chuck was really happy that he shared that knowledge with him. So Chuck Liddell, he's humble, but he also knows his skill set. He knows his limitations. He knows that he's a cage fighter, a one-on-one fighter, and he knows that the battle tactics is a little bit different. And that's where people from that UFC community or that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the best. Why is it the best? Well, because they're always winning the UFC. I'm like, yeah, if you get a guy on the ground and one guy has more superior wrestling skill and he's wrestling one guy, that's one thing. He's going to win a lot of times. However, if you're in a battle and you got 50 people around, you're not going to wrestle for 5 minutes with one guy. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, martial arts is great, and every martial art has a good aspect to it, and you should learn a little bit of all these different martial arts as much as you can, whenever you can. But battle tactics is completely separate from cage fighting. And so gladiators were a cage fighting community, and most of them were slaves, They're slaves that got sometimes minimum training, and then they're thrown in. there's one or two well-known gladiators that had a great skill set, but again, that's not the majority. And then you got a culture of Apaches that their survival instinct and their savagery of the battle tactics taught them that, hey, this is the best approach. Get them from behind, be silent, and then when the battle's erupting, go out there with the scare tactics. Utilize that skill set that we learned from the animal kingdom and use that in a battle tactic application.
It was interesting when we were doing the test, when we were testing the weapons, and they had these gelatin sculptures or whatever, and I was throwing the tomahawks, and sometimes the tomahawks would bounce off the gelatin, so they're over there, they're trying to somebody got this bright idea, hey, let's go put some grease on the tomahawks, and I'm throwing the tomahawks, and the tomahawks are sliding off that damn thing. And so I was like, wow, great idea, man. And then the gladiators were getting cocky, and they go, well, see what happens? And I'm like, okay, then why don't you just take the place of that damn gelatin sculpture, and let's see if these tomahawks bounce off your ass, I said, I'm gonna tomahawk your ass. I said, even if that blade don't hit you, but that butt catches you between the eyes, I said, it's lights out gladiator, And so there was a lot of